Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to AMJ Radio Live on Spaces, a weekly conversation hosted on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, at your very own at AOM Connect. Tune in to AMJ Radio Live every week on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. To do so, look out for the link posted at AOM Connect, or click on the profile picture of the host you see here when they are outlined in a bright color. That means that they are live or on air. This series has a scholar-on-scholar approach where different members of the AOM research community have the chance to speak to and learn from leading authorities in the broad field of management research. The first Wednesday of every month, we invite a special guest to give their remarks on our theme for the month. We recently had guests like Joanna Meyer speaking about Grand Challenges Research Today, as well as John Joseph speaking about decision-making research today. Look out for the link in our bio for the full list and past recordings of our many, many distinguished guests. The second Wednesday of every month, we hear a teaser of The Lit Review, an incredible podcast diving deep into a recent AMJ paper hosted by Sekou Burmese. The fourth Wednesday of every month features an actual AMJ editor. We get to find out a fun fact about this editor, their expertise, what it's been like serving as an editor at the Academy of Management Journal. And I haven't forgotten the third Wednesday of every month. The third Wednesday of every month is interactive and open to being shaped by you. Look for the form in our bio to submit your ideas for guests, to nominate yourself, to suggest formats for this weekly conversation. It's just past 11 now, so let's open up the conversation. I am Dr. Netra Pan. I'm a lecturer in entrepreneurship at Bayes Business School, formerly known as CAS. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by none other than Professor Forrest Briscoe. Professor Forrest Briscoe is a professor of management and organization in the Smeal College of Business at the Pennsylvania State University. His research looks at how organizations decide to adopt new practices and strategies, and how such changes spread across industries and fields of organizations. We've invited Professor Forrest Briscoe to speak with us today because he has also a particular interest in how organizational decision makers act when there is controversy surrounding the changes they're considering, and when stakeholders are advocating for and against those changes, which is also, I guess, a different way of talking about the different mindsets, perspectives, and ideologies that can exist in organizations. Ideology being the theme for this month. So I will hand over to Professor Briscoe. How are you, Forrest? And where are you?
Hi, Netra. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm good. You know, these are not the brightest of times in the world right now, but I'm good. I'm in State College, Pennsylvania. That's the name of the town where Penn State University is.
I hear you. It's really nice to be able to shift at least my focus to discussing research and to hear your voice. It makes what we do a lot more real rather than abstract, reading printed words on a white piece of paper or on your screen. Thank you for connecting with us today. So as you know, today our theme is ideology, and we'd love for you to give our listeners a download. What is ideology? And how important is ideology in understanding the management of organizations?
Well, it's a big topic, obviously, in the social sciences, not just management, or not even primarily management, probably. So there's probably more than one answer, but here's a definition that we've used: a set of prevailing beliefs about how the social world operates, which would include convictions about what outcomes you want in society, and then sort of the means for getting there, beliefs about how those outcomes should be achieved. So it's like a set of connected beliefs or values that a group of people, some subset of society, would share, and they would inform attitudes, behaviors on all sorts of things. And research has connected political ideology to all sorts of attitudes and behaviors.
So maybe we can make the link a little bit more clear then. So you mentioned ideology as a set of prevailing beliefs and desired outcomes, as well as beliefs on how those outcomes should be achieved. And in management, this can be useful for predicting behaviors. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, actually, so let me fill in, especially for a global context, I guess we should fill in, the content of political ideology, because the vast majority of the research on it has focused on this one axis, conservatism versus liberalism. And conservatives, again, this is done a little bit differently in different parts of the literature, but in general, conservatives tend to be more accepting of inequality in a society or an organization or any social entity, more accepting of the status quo as opposed to trying to change things, and more interested in individualism as opposed to liberals, kind of the other side of those things. So historically, if a conservative, someone who's in the conservative ideology camp saw like unequal outcomes, they tend to say that's probably down to individual abilities or drive or some kind of attributes, not necessarily go to problematic systems, biases. But again, these things can kind of shift and recombine. In the US, these two ideologies map onto Republican and Democratic political parties, roughly. That's where this, in some of the papers, people talk about red and blue as shorthand. Those are because of those political party affiliations. For people in Europe, they more often use the terms right and left, which roughly maps on as well, even in a country that doesn't have just like two dominant political parties like the US. So it can definitely have a different meaning and feel in different parts of the world. But I would say, a lot of the research in management that's been done using political ideologies for the last 10, 20 years, it's turned out to be pretty useful to understand as a predictor of a lot of different things inside organizations and in terms of the behaviors of managers and employees and so on. Even like an economic for-profit corporation, the people who make up those corporations are still social and political animals, and they don't fully check their beliefs at the door or become, homo economicus or agent of the firm. So it maybe it's not surprising, but it has turned out to be pretty useful. And I don't know, you might have a feeling, I have a feeling that it may be even more useful because ideology has been really salient lately.
Okay, so we really threw our listeners in the deep end here, just being like, okay, this is what ideology is. And you've helped to guide us more towards the concept of political ideology and how that might look like in specific countries or regions. So you mentioned the spectrum in the US that tends to be considered red, conservative, all the way to blue, liberal. But ideology, of course, looks different. Political ideology maps out differently in different parts of the world. You said so many interesting things, but the other thing that I think is worth maybe double clicking on is this idea of political ideology being relevant to the study of for-profit firms, right? So we think that ideology might be something that we might study in the social sciences, political science, or even psychology. But your vast body of work has actually shown that by considering individuals' ideologies, in particular CEOs' ideologies or employees' ideologies, we can actually understand things like firm performance and also social activism within a company. Let me ask you this. You also have been on the editorial boards of numerous strategy management journals. I think practically the top ones we think of, you've probably been on the editorial board. So maybe I can ask you this. Do you think then ideology is a great lens for studying management research? And would you think that it would be an evergreen research topic?
Well, yeah, I think it's explained more things and been more useful than I would have thought when we started doing this kind of research. a lot of the research has been done in the US, and the meaning of liberalism and conservatism and the relationship between people's sort of beliefs and values, ideology, and the political parties and what's going on in the political domain is kind of changing over time. So I do think it's a evergreen topic, but the meaning of these two dominant poles or ends of the axis that we talk about are probably changing, and there's some methodological limits that we encounter when like the main way we've been studying this is using political campaign donations of individuals and corporations to candidates in the political process. And so when we use that data, the meaning of it's probably changing over time. So yeah, it's evergreen, but actually maybe it's even more evergreen because we need to keep revising what it means.
It's a dynamic field, yes. So you were mentioning the interesting data set of public donations to political parties or candidates. And so it's often CEO or employee political affiliation is often operationalized by looking at who they've donated to or how much. But you're saying that because of basically the different party compositions or political or meanings behind different political positions, we're going to have to continually push research forward in this field.
I mean, that's sort of a methodological issue. I mean, theoretically, of course, we're also in this environment right now where people are talking about the politicization of more things, including things that businesses do and talk about, and business leaders talk about, and polarization and increased partisanship. And those are sort of theoretical developments in the society that need to be understood and studied too. So there's both, I guess, changes in the methods and changes in the theories. There's a lot to do.
That sounds really rich. So yeah, in the field, different companies are doing different things, and we need to understand that from a theoretical perspective. And then there's also much more we can do from a methodological perspective in terms of how we operationalize or measure political affiliation. What have been your most surprising findings, given your decades of work on ideology?
I mean, a lot of the early work wasn't surprising in the sense of counterintuitive, like the relationship between, say, more liberal corporations or CEOs and the practices. Like one of our early things was looking at studying LGBT rights and employment practices. But I guess to skip to something surprising, honestly, when Abhinav Gupta, who was a PhD student at Penn State, and Don Hambrick and I looked at the relationship between political ideology and something that seems like a totally non-political thing, strategic resource allocation in a corporation. Basically, we teach in business schools, usually you want to allocate capital in a sort of reward the winners, reward the high-performing business units way. And we found that that actually only benefits firms in aggregate if they have conservative-leaning employees. If the organization has more liberal-leaning employees, they'd actually be better off engaging in a more socialistic or even-handed, relatively speaking, resource allocation. So I thought that was pretty crazy that this relatively hidden thing, the leanings of the workforce, actually shapes the effectiveness of this seemingly, economically driven strategic decision or process.
Wow, that is really interesting. So I think you're referring to your 2018 AMJ paper, Even-handedness in Resource Allocation, its relationship with CEO ideology, organizational discretion, and firm performance. So that is absolutely fascinating that rewarding different business units in a significant way or in a stark way versus even-handedly rewarding all business units is only effective if the employees are also conservative.
Yeah, exactly.
The organization. Okay, so basically, it's a comment on the incentives that we can use within organizations, but the incentives only work if they really match the employees or the organization's worldview in a way.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
We are already over time, so I want to move to the last question and give you a chance to close out.
Sure.
As a researcher interested in so many things, and also with your past experience on editorial boards, what's one thing that you would like to see more in your research or maybe more out there in the field?
Well, I'm going to do a couple things quickly. I think because we have an increase in kind of politicization, polarization, partisanship, clearly it's kind of finding its way into organizations. I think just normatively speaking, we need more research about how to depoliticize, depolarize, And I don't know if that is about returning to collegiality or what form it takes, but I think that's an area where we could use more research. I think also it's interesting. One of the things we casually observed but haven't really documented is the possibility that there's going to be more red firms and blue firms and fewer purple firms because people are kind of sorting into organizations with like-minded others more than they used to. If that's true, we need to show it and think about all the many implications it might have. And the third thing is we know digital technology, including social media platforms, including like this one, fuel partisanship and polarization. So the fact that firms have increased digital, more people are working digitally, maybe remotely, digital tools. How is all that affecting the way political ideology kind of worms its way into the workplace? I think we need more research on that. So there's lots to do.
Wow, so fascinating, and either fortunately or unfortunately, very, very timely. So the first thing you're looking for in future research is research on how to depoliticize or depolarize, and this is linked also to your second point of folks self-selecting into different firms with different connotations, and so you're using the U.S. framework of red versus blue, and then the mix being purple. So, is there a way that we can understand other groups or tribes that folks would self-select in that might not always be political and also partisan? And then the third thing: how are digital platforms either accentuating or reducing this polarization or this politicization of what used to be seen as a non-political field? Well, thank you so much, Forrest. Any parting words before we close off?
No, more work to do. So we won't run out of things to study here.
More work to do, and thank you so much for walking us through how we might do that. Thanks everyone for listening, and see you next week.